Hi, Jeremy Jansen here, and this is the video documentation for the Epic Combinator Notch Factory from Filter Research 3. So I created this patch because I really like the sound of notch filters, but there isn't a really wide variety of them in Reason right now. You can get one using Thor's state variable filter, but that's about it. So I've used a different technique to create these notches, and that's actually creating them using a low pass and a high pass. If you take a low pass and a high pass and put them close together, actually the gap between them creates a notch filter. Makes sense, right? The big advantage of creating notch filters this way is then you can control the bandwidth or size of the notch just by controlling the distance between the low pass and the high pass filter. I've gone beyond that even and added a second notch filter to this patch. So it's a really flexible patch, and I'm going to just get started with using it and showing you how all the controls work. I'm going to start off playing a drum loop dry, and then I'll bring in Notch Factory. I'm using a drum loop from Dr. Octorex here, but I really like the sound of this patch on many other types of sounds, especially synthesized basses sound great with notch filters. Okay, so here is the dry patch, and now let's bring Notch Factory in. All right, so now with rotaries 1 and 3, you can see that controls the first notch and the second notch's frequency. If you line up the notches on the same frequency or value, you're going to get a wider notch. But you can also control the notch width with the bandwidth controls on rotaries 2 and 4. So that's about as wide as it gets. You can hear that there's just the very highest frequencies and lowest frequencies right now. Okay, so that's the basics of it, but there's a lot more than that, so let's continue on. These Thor controls actually control multiple rotaries here. So you can set up a notch frequency on 1 and 2 that you like, and then you can use the double notch frequency and it will move both of these rotaries, but keeps the relationship between them. So if notch 2 is slightly higher, it'll stay slightly higher. And the same goes with the double notch bandwidth control. It'll keep the relationship between them, but move them up through the frequency spectrum. One of the other advantages of creating notch filters using low pass and high pass filters like I've done here is that you can additionally add resonance to the notches, and that means that the low pass and the high pass peaks that are creating this notch will have increased resonance. So it doesn't quite sound like you might expect, but it is useful to have that control. Okay, and we also have an envelope follower connected up to both notches, and we can control the amount of envelope modulation from that follower going to the notch frequencies using these two controls. Keep in mind that envelope followers are quite sensitive to input volume. So if you don't quite get the amount of envelope modulation you want, even using these controls, try changing your input volume. Two of the buttons on the combinator relate to these envelope follower controls with the long follow attack and long follow release. That just adjusts the attack and release time on the envelope follower. Below that, we've got some LFO controls, and this LFO is connected up to two different controls, the double notch frequency control and the double notch bandwidth. And we can control which one it's being sent to, or both, using these two buttons. And this rotary will then control the amounts that are being sent to those two destinations. So let's send it to frequency. Of course, we have our LFO rate control here. The LFO is set up by default to triangle wave. Our final Thor controls control a pulverizer that's set up at the end of the signal path, and we have the pulverizer squash, compression, and dirt distortion. Back up at the combinator controls, there's just a few more parameters that I haven't discussed yet. The first one here is the sync LFO button, which is pretty self-explanatory, just syncs up to tempo, the LFO that we discussed down here. And we have some tape compression. For the Epic combinators, I haven't really stuck to the plan of always using rotary 4 for wet-dry control. Often I've shifted that off to the mod wheel, and that's what I've done here. So you can easily get some dry mix back using the mod wheel. And for the pitch wheel, we have some stereo modulation that shifts part of the notch to one side and another part to the other side of the stereo spectrum. And it's obviously bipolar, and well, it's probably easier to hear than to describe. All right, that's all for this patch. Hope you enjoy Notch Factory.